Welcome, grab a popcorn, relax, you will enjoy this story, and please do not forget to subscribe to this channel.
He entered the palace as a servant. He was treated like trash, but behind the rough clothes and quiet voice was a man carrying a secret powerful enough to break the whole kingdom. Before we begin this shocking royal story, I want to ask you one question. If someone looked poor, ordinary, and powerless, would you treat them with kindness or with contempt? Because in this story, 3 princesses made the mistake of looking down on the wrong man, and the price they paid was heavier than anyone expected. So before we dive in, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Now sit back, grab your popcorn, relax, and let's step into this palace of secrets, pride, scandal, and painful truths. The scream came from the dining hall before the plates had even been cleared. One moment, the royal family had been eating in uneasy silence. The next moment, King Daniel Eza pushed his chair back so hard that it nearly fell. His hand went to his throat. His cup dropped from his fingers and hit the floor. The sound of it breaking sent fear through the room. "Your Majesty!" one of the guards shouted. Queen Beatrice Eza, the king's wife, rose from her seat so fast that her wrapper brushed against the table. Her face turned pale. "Daniel!" Princess Sandra Eza, the first daughter, froze with her spoon halfway to her mouth. Princess Linda Eza stood up and began to tremble. Princess Rita Eze looked from her father to the food, as if she had just seen death sitting with them at the table. The youngest daughter, Princess Nina Eze, stood too, but unlike her sisters, she moved first. She rushed toward her father with a cup of water, her hands shaking. The king slapped it away. "Don't," he barked. The room went still. That one word changed everything. No one looked at the king again first. They all looked at the food. Then they looked at the woman standing near the serving table. Martha Nwosu. Martha had been the palace cook for years. She was not young anymore, but she was strong, neat, and quiet. She had been trusted with the king's food, the queen's food, the daughter's food, even the meals sent to private rooms. No one had ever imagined that danger would come wearing the face they had seen every day. The guards turned to her at once. Martha stepped back. "I did nothing." "Hold her!" King Daniel thundered. 2 guards grabbed her arms before she could move any farther. The metal bracelets on one guard's wrist clinked as he tightened his grip. Martha struggled once, then stopped when she saw that no one in the room was ready to save her. Queen Beatrice pressed one hand to her chest. "Martha, what is this?" "It is not what you think," Martha said quickly. "I did not poison anybody." "You are lying," Sandra snapped. "Father almost died." "I did not," Martha shouted back, her voice cracking. "I swear I did not." But the king was already breathing harder than before, and rage had entered his face. King Daniel Eza was not a small man. Even seated, he carried the kind of presence that made people lower their eyes. Standing in anger, he looked like a storm that had finally broken loose. "I trusted you," he said, each word heavy. "I trusted you with my life. I trusted you with the life of my wife. I trusted you with my children. If this food is clean, then eat it." Martha's face changed. It was small, very small. Just a flicker. But everyone saw it. Linda covered her mouth with one hand. Rita took a step back from the table. Nina stood still, staring at Martha, and for the first time, real fear entered her chest. Not the fear of what almost happened, the fear of what was now becoming clear. The king pointed at the plate. "Eat it." Martha shook her head. "Your Majesty, eat it." She began to cry. Queen Beatrice's voice broke. "Martha, tell the truth." Martha dropped to her knees. The whole hall fell silent except for her crying. At first, she still tried to protect herself.
"Maybe it entered the food by mistake. Maybe one of the girls touched the wrong thing. Maybe someone is trying to frame me."
But the more she spoke, the weaker her lies became. Then Sandra stepped forward, her face hard.
"Why are you crying like this if you are innocent?"
Martha did not answer. Rita's voice rose. Talk! Linda pointed at her with a shaking hand. What did my father ever do to you? Martha looked up then. Her eyes were red, but they were no longer full of fear alone. They were full of hate. I did it, she said. No one moved. I poisoned the food. Queen Beatrice staggered back into her chair. Nina slowly turned to look at Martha as if she no longer knew the woman standing there. Sandra's face twisted in anger. Why? Martha let out a bitter laugh through her tears. Because this man is not innocent, she said, looking straight at the king. This man destroyed my life before I even became a woman. The king's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Martha went on, her voice growing louder now, stronger now, like a wound tearing open after years. You threw my father into prison. He died there. My mother suffered until she also died. I grew up with nothing, no home, no peace, no family. I grew up hearing one name over and over again. She pointed at the king. Yours. Nina felt cold. Linda whispered, Oh God. Martha's lips trembled. I waited for this day. I waited and waited. I told myself one day I would stand close to the man who ruined my family, and he would feel even a little of my pain. Rita looked at her in disbelief.
Martha, did you enter this palace for revenge? Yes.
Then the truth is out.
The guards looked shaken. Then the king finally spoke. His voice was quieter than before, but somehow it was more frightening. You have lived with poison in your heart for many years, Martha, he said, and the saddest thing is that you do not even know the full truth. She frowned through her tears. What truth? King Daniel stepped toward her. Your father was not the innocent man your mother told you he was. Martha's breathing changed. The king did not stop. He was the reason my parents died. The room seemed to hold its breath. Martha stared at him. No. Yes, the king said. Your father's hands were not clean. He destroyed lives too. He caused the deaths of the people who gave me life. He was punished for what he did. If your mother raised you with only half the story, then she raised you in darkness. No, Martha said again, but this time it sounded weaker. You came here to avenge a man whose sins you did not understand, the king said. And today you almost added another crime to the blood already tied to that history. Martha's tears fell harder now, but her face had changed. The anger was still there, but confusion had entered it too. Shock, doubt, pain. For a second, Nina almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then she remembered her father clutching his throat. King Daniel turned to the guards. Take her away! Martha struggled this time. No, no, he is lying to save himself! But her voice no longer carried the same fire as before. The guards dragged her toward the door. Queen Beatrice looked away. Sandra stood stiff with anger. Linda had started crying quietly. Rita folded her arms around herself. Nina remained where she was, unable to move. Martha's voice echoed as she was taken out. Her crying, her shouting, her broken words followed them down the corridor until even that sound faded. Then there was silence. A deep, ugly silence. The kind that comes after truth has broken something that cannot be fixed in one day. King Daniel slowly sat down again, but he did not look like a man returning to his seat. He looked like a man carrying old ghosts on his shoulders. Queen Beatrice stared at the untouched dishes on the table. All these years, she whispered, all these years she was in this palace. No one answered her. Because there was nothing to say. The palace had not just escaped death. It had uncovered a wound that had been hidden for years, and that wound was still bleeding. The next morning the palace felt wrong. Word had not spread beyond the inner walls yet, but inside the house fear moved from room to room like smoke. Nobody wanted to eat. Nobody trusted the kitchen. Nobody spoke Martha's name unless it was necessary. And worst of all, there was no cook. That became clear before noon. The king could not go without food. The queen could not stay hungry because of fear. The palace workers still needed meals. The guards still had to eat. So the burden fell on the last person who wanted it. Princess Nina Eze. Why me? Nina asked, standing in the kitchen with both hands on her waist. She was the youngest of the 4 daughters, and everyone knew it. She was not lazy, but she hated being pushed into things just because she was the last child. She had a softer face than her sisters and calmer eyes, but that did not mean she enjoyed suffering in silence. Queen Beatrice looked tired as she entered the kitchen. Because someone has to do it for now. Nina turned from the cutting board. Sandra is there, Linda is there, Rita is there. Why is it always me?
Your sisters don't know how to control themselves in the kitchen.
The Queen said. That is not my fault. No, it is not, the Queen replied, rubbing her forehead. But this family cannot starve because life is unfair. Nina opened her mouth, then closed it again. She knew her mother was not really fighting her. The Queen was shaken too. Her eyes carried the fear of a woman who had almost become a widow overnight. Nina sighed. Fine, but this is only for now. Only for now, the Queen said. Just then, someone ran past the kitchen door, then ran back, then peeked in. It was Tony. Tony was the palace errand boy, though nobody knew exactly when that became his full identity. He was a slim boy with restless legs, quick eyes, and the kind of mouth that always seemed ready to talk before thinking. He had no parents and no real place of his own. The palace had taken him in, but not fully. He lived around people without truly belonging to any of them.
Nina, should I tell them the food will delay or lie and say it's almost ready?
Tony, don't you dare lie about this.
Enough. The truth, Tony. No games.
Tony grinned. That means food will delay. Tony, the Queen warned. He straightened at once. Yes, my Queen. Queen Beatrice looked at him for a long moment. Not with anger, with something closer to worry. This boy should be in school, she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. Tony shifted on his feet. Nina glanced at him. For once, he was not joking. The Queen continued. He runs messages, carries trays, listens where he should not listen, and grows up in the middle of palace trouble. This is not a life for a child. Tony looked down. But there was no answer to that either, because everyone knew she was right. The palace used Tony. Fed him, yes. Sheltered him, yes. But no one had truly taken charge of him. He was there, but he was floating. Like a child the world had forgotten to claim. Queen Beatrice looked back at Nina. Be careful with the food. I will. And from now on, the Queen added, her voice firming up, we will not bring just anybody into this palace to cook for us. Nina paused. The Queen's face hardened. What happened yesterday must never happen again. Later that evening, after eating the little Nina managed to prepare, King Daniel sat in silence for a long time. Then he finally said, no more female cooks. Queen Beatrice looked at him. I agree. The king leaned back in his chair.
The next person who enters the kitchen must be watched from the beginning.
We must know where the person comes from, who trained him, who knows him, and what kind of life he has lived.
The king nodded slowly. Then he said the thing that surprised them all. This time, I want a man. Sandra looked up. Linda frowned. Rita blinked. Nina stopped in the doorway. A male cook? Linda asked. Yes, the king said. Queen Beatrice did not argue. After what Martha had done, fear had changed the rules. Nobody said it out loud, but everybody felt it. This palace was no longer just a royal home. It was a house full of hidden pain, wounded pride, and secrets that had slept for too long. And now, another stranger was about to enter it. 3 days after Martha was taken away, the palace gates opened for a new visitor. It was late morning. The sun was high and the compound felt quieter than usual, as if the house was still waiting for trouble to show itself again. A black car stopped in front of the main building. One of the guards moved toward it at once. Then the back door opened and an older man stepped out first. It was Chief Felix Okoro. Chief Felix was one of King Daniel's trusted men. He was a wealthy elder, careful with his words and known for bringing only serious matters to the palace. If he had come in person, then the king knew whatever he brought was worth seeing. Behind him, another figure stepped out of the car. Tony, who had been sweeping one side of the front steps in a lazy way, stopped at once. The young man who came down from the car looked too fine to be a palace cook. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, and naturally handsome in a quiet way. But his clothes were simple. His shirt looked clean but cheap. His trousers were plain. His sandals were dusty from use. He carried no air of class around him. If anything, he looked like a village boy who had tried his best to appear neat before entering a place above him. Still, Tony narrowed his eyes. He muttered to himself. This one is too fresh. The young man lifted a small bag from the back seat and followed Chief Felix inside. Tony dropped the broom and hurried after them. Inside the sitting hall, King Daniel and Queen Beatrice were already waiting. The daughters were there too. Sandra sat upright with the kind of face that made it clear she was not ready to be impressed. Linda looked curious. Rita looked bored. Nina stood near one side of the room, silent and watchful. Chief Felix greeted the king and bowed his head slightly. "Your Majesty," he said, "I have brought the young man I spoke to you about." The king looked at the stranger. Chief Felix turned. "His name is Benjamin Okoro." The young man bowed quickly. "Good morning, Your Majesty." "Good morning, my queen." His voice sounded respectful, but his words came out a little rough. Not rude, just unpolished. Chief Felix continued, "He is from a good family, but life has not been easy for him. He cooks very well. I have tasted his food myself." Queen Beatrice studied Ben from head to toe. "Can he be trusted?" Chief Felix answered without delay. "As much as anyone can be trusted before they are tested." The king grunted softly. That was fair enough. Then Chief Felix added,
There is one thing the palace should know. Benjamin Okoro has a hearing problem. He hears, but not always at once. If someone speaks softly, he may miss it.
That changed the room at once. Sandra frowned. Linda exchanged a quick look with Rita. Rita let out a small laugh before she could stop herself. The king looked at Ben. "Can you hear me now?" Ben lifted his head. "Yes, Your Majesty. I hear you." Chief Felix nodded. When spoken to clearly, he responds. But sometimes you may need to raise your voice. Tony had slipped into the room by then, pretending to dust a table near the wall. He stared openly at Ben. Then he whispered to himself, "Handsome like this and cook again? This one did not come here for food alone." Nina heard him and shot him a warning look. Tony looked away quickly, but he kept watching Ben. The king stood. "If you can do your work well and keep your hands clean, you may stay." Ben bowed again. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Queen Beatrice asked one more question. "Can you cook all kinds of meals?" Ben nodded. "Yes, my queen. Soup, stew, rice, swallow, breakfast, juice, I can do many things." His answer sounded simple, awkward too. The words came out with none of the smoothness expected in a palace. It sounded more like he had learned by doing than by training. Sandra folded her arms. This was the person who had been brought to replace Martha. A half-deaf village boy. Chief Felix turned to leave, but before he did, he spoke quietly to Ben. "Do your work well. Do not disappoint me." "I will not," Ben said. But as he said it, his eyes moved once around the room. Quickly. Carefully. He did not stare long enough for anyone to notice properly, but he saw enough. The king, proud, wounded, still angry from betrayal. The queen, careful, suspicious, tired. Sandra, proud and sharp. Linda, soft-looking but proud too. Rita, restless and quick to mock. Nina, the only one not laughing. Ben lowered his eyes again. He looked simple, but his mind was working. Ben had barely been shown the kitchen when Tony appeared beside the doorway. Tony leaned against the frame like he owned the place. "You don't look like cook," he said. Ben looked at him. "What do I look like?" Tony shrugged. "Like trouble." Ben almost smiled, but the smile did not fully come. "Are you the owner of this kitchen?" he asked. Tony grinned. "No, but I know this palace past some people." Ben picked up a tray and began setting things down where they belonged. "Then know your way and leave me to work." Tony moved closer instead. "I am warning you," he said in a lower voice. "These people will smile today and bite tomorrow." Ben kept arranging the kitchen. Tony went on, and the princesses. Tony! It was Nina. Tony jumped back. Nina stepped into the kitchen. What are you doing here? Nothing. You're disturbing him already. Tony pointed at Ben. I'm only helping him know that this palace is not normal. Leave. Tony looked at Ben once more. Just remember what I said. You look too handsome to just be a cook. People like you come for more. Nina gave him a harder look this time. Tony ran off. Nina let out a breath, then turned to Ben. Don't mind him. He talks too much. Ben nodded. I can see that. It was the first normal exchange anyone in that house had given him. Nina noticed his bag still by the door. Your room will be prepared soon. Thank you. She looked at him for a moment, then said, If you don't hear someone the first time, just ask again. Don't stand there looking confused. It will make things worse. Ben gave a small nod. I understand. Then Nina left too. Ben watched her go. The youngest one, he thought. Different from the others. The trouble truly began when the older sisters came to see him in the kitchen together. Sandra entered first, Linda after her, and Rita last. They looked around as if they were inspecting a market stall. So this is the new cook, Sandra said. Ben turned. Good afternoon, my princess. He had heard her, but he answered a little late. Sandra noticed. Her lips curved coldly. He really cannot hear well. Linda laughed. Look at him. Rita stepped closer. Are you sure you're here to cook? Ben looked at her. Yes, my princess. What? I said yes, my princess. Rita laughed again. Why does he sound like that? Sandra folded her arms tighter. What is your name? Ben looked from one face to another, as if trying to catch who had spoken first. Linda shook her head. See? He does not even know who is talking. Sandra repeated herself louder this time. Your name? Benjamin, he said. Benjamin Okoro. Rita glanced at his face again and smirked. And they brought this one to us like a gift. Sandra's eyes were harder. Listen to me. In this palace, when you are spoken to, answer fast. We are not your mates. Yes, my princess. Linda laughed at the tone of his voice. Why is he talking like a child? Ben said nothing. Sandra moved closer. Are you dumb too, or only deaf? Before he could answer, Nina came into the kitchen. That is enough, she said quietly. The three older sisters turned. Sandra looked annoyed. We are talking to the cook. You have seen him, Nina replied. Let him work. Rita rolled her eyes. You are already defending him. Nina ignored the question. Mother asked for lunch to be ready on time. That was enough to make them leave, but not before Sandra gave Ben one last long look that held only one thing. Contempt. From that day, the palace daughters made life difficult for him. Not all at once. Little by little. Sandra was the worst at first. She spoke to him as if his hearing problem meant he had no sense. She repeated things in a cutting voice and enjoyed making him feel slow. Linda treated him like a joke. She laughed at his words, laughed at his face, laughed when he paused before answering. Rita was the quickest to anger. She snapped over small things and acted as if he had offended her just by existing. Only Nina spoke to him with some level of respect. Not warmth, not softness, just simple respect. That difference did not escape Ben. Neither did anything else. He noticed how Sandra wanted control in every room she entered. He noticed how Linda liked to mock first and think later. He noticed how Rita was loud because she did not know how to carry quiet strength. And he noticed how Nina did not join them when they went too far. But his observations did not save him from their behavior. The first slap came on the fourth day. Sandra had asked him a question while he was carrying a tray from the kitchen. He had not heard her. She called again, and before he could turn fully, her hand landed across his face. The tray shook in his hands. Linda gasped first. Then she laughed. Rita laughed too. Sandra looked at him as if what she had done was nothing. When I speak, answer, she said. Ben touched his cheek once. His jaw tightened, but he bowed his head. "Sorry, my princess." Sandra walked away. The others followed. Only Nina, who had come down the corridor just in time to see the end of it, remained standing. She looked at Ben's face, then at the direction Sandra had gone. For a moment she looked like she wanted to say something, but she did not. She only said, "Take the tray inside before the juice spills." Ben nodded, and the moment passed. The days settled into a hard routine. Ben cooked. The family ate. The daughters complained. And still he remained. One morning, Linda entered the kitchen while he was making breakfast. She looked at the plate and frowned. "Why did you separate the eggs like this?" Ben turned. "My princess?" "The egg," she snapped. "Do I look like someone who eats it like this?" Ben looked at the plate. "I can change it." Linda hissed. "Of course you will change it. Must I explain everything to you?" She walked out before he answered. Another afternoon, Rita took one sip of juice and nearly shouted the roof down. "Why is this not cold?" Ben looked at the glass. It came from the fridge. "Well, it is not cold enough. I can bring another one." "Use your brain next time," Rita snapped. He brought another one. Then there was Sandra. She asked for noodles one evening and found fault in it before even tasting it. "You used only 2 eggs?" Ben nodded. "Yes, my princess." She stared at him in disbelief. "Do I look poor to you?" Ben said nothing. Sandra dropped the fork. "You people bring village habits everywhere." And she sent the plate away. The worst came when Rita threw a bundle of clothes at him. "Wash these." Ben stared at the clothes. Then he looked up. "All?" Rita folded her arms. "Can you not see?" There were wrappers, tops, underwear, and private clothes mixed together. Ben hesitated only a second too long. Rita's voice sharpened. "Pick them up." Nina, who was passing, stopped. Her eyes moved from Rita to the clothes, then to Ben. She knew it was wrong. She knew it. But the house was built in such a way that some things happened simply because one person had power and another did not. Nina stood there for a moment, then said,
Rita, our mother is calling for you.
irritated. "Now?"
Yes.
"Yes." Rita clicked her tongue and left. Ben bent and gathered the clothes quietly. Nina remained. "You don't have to do everything they say at once," she said. Ben looked at her. "If I don't, there will still be trouble." She had no answer to that, because he was right. In the middle of all this, Tony kept causing his own trouble. He was caught one afternoon near the back corridor with a small packet of cigarettes in his hand. The guard who found him dragged him straight to the king. Tony shouted the whole way, "It is not my own! It is not my own!" King Daniel sat up sharply when he saw the packet. "You are smoking."
Tony, are you smoking?
No, Papa, I swear I'm not.
Where did you get it from?
It's not mine. Someone put it there. That's it.
"Picked it. That is all. I picked it." The king's face darkened. "At your age?" Tony's eyes filled. "I did not smoke it." One guard muttered, "Boys like this start early." Tony turned to him. "I said it is not my own." "Keep quiet," the king thundered. Tony fell silent at once, but tears had entered his eyes. The king looked ready to punish him hard. It showed in his face. But the queen stepped in. "He is a child," she said. "A stubborn child," the king replied. "He is still a child. He lives here and behaves like a street boy." Queen Beatrice's voice softened, but it did not lose strength. "Because that is where he came from. He needs school, not only punishment." Tony wiped his face with the back of his hand. The room went quiet. The queen looked at her husband. "How long will he keep running around like this, carrying things, hearing things, growing wild?" The king did not answer at once. Finally he said, "Take him away from here." Tony's heart jumped, but the queen quickly said, "Not out of the palace. I will speak on the matter again." The king waved a hand in irritation. "Just remove him from my sight." Tony was led out. He went trembling, but he was not beaten. That night, Nina found him sitting behind one of the back steps. "You nearly got yourself killed today," she said. Tony sniffed. "They never believe me." "Where did you get it from?" He looked away. "I found it near the boys' quarters." Nina sat beside him. "Then next time, leave what does not belong to you." Tony kicked at the ground. "I was only looking." Nina's voice softened. "Mother is right. You should be in school." Tony laughed bitterly. "Who will pay?" Nina had no answer. Inside the palace, people talked about dignity, tradition, and shame. But a boy like Tony could still sit outside at night with no clear future at all. For all the trouble around Ben, one thing could not be denied. He could cook. He did not only cook well, he cooked in a way that made people remember the food after they stood up from the table. The king noticed it first. Then the queen. Then even the daughters who insulted him daily had to face the truth in their own mouths. His soups were rich without being heavy. His rice never came out careless. His stews had balance. His breakfast trays were neat. His juices tasted fresh. A house that had been eating with fear slowly began eating with appetite again. One evening after dinner, the king wiped his hands and leaned back. "This boy cooks very well." No one answered. Queen Beatrice nodded. "Yes." Sandra's face tightened at once. Linda looked down at her plate. Rita drank water and said nothing. Nina glanced once at Ben, who was standing a little distance away with lowered eyes. The king went on. Chief Felix was right. That praise annoyed the daughters more than they let show, because they did not want the person they looked down on to earn honor in front of them. It felt like an insult to their pride, but Ben only bowed. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The matter might have gone on like that for longer if the king had not finally heard how badly his daughters had been treating him. It was Nina who said the least, but it was the queen who noticed the most. A late reply here, a complaint there, a slap mentioned by one maid in fear, a bundle of private clothes given for washing. Small things, ugly things. Things royal daughters should not be doing. One afternoon after lunch, the king sent for Ben privately. Ben came into the smaller sitting room and bowed. "You sent for me, Your Majesty." King Daniel studied him for a moment. The anger on his face was not the kind Ben had seen before. This one was quieter. "I have heard some things," the king said. Ben did not speak. "I heard my daughters have not been fair to you." Ben lowered his eyes. "It is nothing, Your Majesty." The king's mouth tightened. "Do not lie because you want peace." Ben remained silent. That silence told the truth better than words. King Daniel let out a long breath. "I brought you here to cook, not to be insulted like an animal."
You were brought here to cook, not to be insulted like an animal.
Yes, Your Highness, I am here to work.
You will work, but you will not be treated like dirt. This palace has honor.
He paused, then added, "What happened in this palace with Martha has already brought enough shame. I will not have my house become a place where people are crushed for no reason." Ben nodded slowly. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The king looked at him one more time. "If any of them goes too far again, you will speak." Ben hesitated. "Yes, Your Majesty." When he left the room, he found Nina standing not far from the door. She had clearly been passing, but there was no way to know how much she had heard. She looked at him for a second, and then she asked,
What did our father say?
The king told me to keep doing my work.
That is good.
"That is good." He bowed his head slightly and moved on. But as he walked away, his face changed. Only a little. Only for a moment. He still looked like a quiet village cook trying to survive a difficult palace. But inside him, something remained alert. He was not only enduring, he was learning, watching, measuring. And the more he watched that house, the clearer it became that the poison Martha brought into the palace had not started with food. It had been living in the hearts of people for a long time, and the palace had not finished revealing itself yet. The next morning, Ben was already in the kitchen before sunrise. He moved quietly, like someone who had learned not to waste strength. Water boiled on the fire. A pot sat open on one side. Chopped vegetables were arranged in small bowls. The air carried the smell of onions and pepper. He was grinding crayfish when Nina walked in. She had tied her hair back carelessly and looked as though she had just left her room without wanting anyone to stop her. She did not speak at first. She only watched him for a moment. Then she said,
You wake up too early.
Food does not cook itself.
What are you making?
Smile did not fully come. What are you making? Breakfast first, then vegetable soup. Nina stepped closer. You make vegetable soup often. The king likes it. She nodded. My mother too. Ben went back to work. Nina looked around the kitchen. Do you need help? That made him pause. He lifted his head slowly, as if he had not expected that question from someone in that house. With what? He asked. With anything, she said. I am not offering because I am kind. I am offering because if you finish faster, everyone eats faster. Ben gave a small nod. You can help me wash those leaves. Nina moved to the other side of the table and began washing the vegetables. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of running water and metal touching metal. It was quiet, simple, normal. Ben noticed it at once. No sharp words, no mockery, no effort to make him feel small. After some time, Nina spoke again. How do you make yours taste like that? Like what? Like food people remember after eating. Ben looked at her, but she was still focused on the vegetables. He answered after a moment. Balance. Balance? Yes, salt, pepper, oil, seasoning. If one is too much, it spoils the rest. Nina nodded slowly. That makes sense.
And the leaves?
They must go in not too early and not too late.
Not too early, not too late.
That was how it began. Not with romance. Not with long talks. Not with stolen glances. Just simple mornings in the kitchen. Washing leaves. Cutting onions. Asking small questions. Learning how much water was too much. Learning when to lower the fire. Learning how to tell when stew had gone from raw to ready. Ben noticed very quickly that Nina did not come to show herself. She came because she truly wanted to know, and when she asked something, she listened to the answer. That was new to him. Very new. The others noticed it too. Not at first in a serious way. Sandra saw Nina in the kitchen one afternoon and said, "So this is where you hide now?" Nina did not look up from the tray she was drying. I am not hiding. Linda leaned against the wall. Then what are you doing with the cook every day? Learning, Nina said simply. Rita laughed. Learning what? How to cut leaf. Nina kept working. At least I will know how to feed myself if life changes. Sandra rolled her eyes. Don't start sounding deep. Ben stayed quiet and continued what he was doing. That was how these moments usually went. Nina answered only what she needed to answer. The others laughed if they wanted. Ben kept his head down. Then everyone moved on. But something had already started changing in the house. At first, it was only about the food. One evening, Sandra tasted the vegetable soup and stopped talking halfway through her meal. She took another spoon, then another. Linda noticed. You like it? Sandra put down the spoon with a controlled face. It is fine. But the next day, she sent a maid to the kitchen. Princess Sandra said the cook should make that soup again. Ben said nothing. He only nodded. The second shift came from Linda. She started coming into the kitchen, by accident, whenever Ben was cooking something special. At first, she would pretend she only came to drink water, then she would ask careless questions. What are you making? Who asked for this one? Let me taste. She always acted as though she was doing him a favor by speaking to him. But she kept coming back. Rita changed in her own way too. One day she entered while Ben was lifting a heavy pot off the fire. He had rolled his sleeves up. The heat had brought sweat to his neck and arms. His movements were firm, controlled, and stronger than she had noticed before. There was nothing soft about the way he worked. No laziness, no clumsy fear. He moved like someone used to hard things. Rita stood still for a second longer than she meant to. Ben looked up. "My princess?" She blinked quickly. "I did not call you." Then she walked out at once. But something had shifted. The same thing happened again and again. A passing look. A longer pause. An extra second of silence. They began seeing what they had refused to see. Yes, his speech was rough. Yes, his clothes were plain. Yes, he still looked like a simple village boy. But he was also tall, strong, handsome in a quiet way. And the more they saw him, the harder it became to keep calling him ugly. That was the irony of it all. The daughters who had mocked him first were the first to begin noticing him most. The change did not happen openly. It happened in pieces. Sandra came into the kitchen one evening and said, "That soup from yesterday, keep some for me." Ben nodded. "Yes, my princess." She stayed there instead of leaving. Ben waited. Finally he asked, "Is there anything else?" Sandra lifted her chin.
I don't need another reason to stand in my father's kitchen.
No, you do not.
She glanced at the pot. "Taste it first before serving me. Last time it was too hot." Ben looked at the soup. It was barely boiling. But he only said, "Yes, my princess." Sandra remained there another full minute before walking away. The next afternoon, Linda came in smiling in a strange way.
I came to talk.
Talk?
Must I stop talking entirely?
"Yes. Must I not talk again?" Ben said nothing. Linda moved closer.
Your English is bad.
Sorry.
I didn't tell you to say sorry, only that your English is bad.
Yes.
Who taught you
He
to
nodded.
speak that way?
"Yes." Linda tilted her head. "Who taught you to speak like that?" Ben answered simply, "Life." She laughed. "That is not an answer." Ben did not respond. Linda stayed a little longer, asking pointless questions and correcting words he had not even said wrong. When she finally left, she looked slightly annoyed with herself. Rita found her own excuse too. She started bringing him unnecessary instructions. Mother said the tea should not be too sweet. Father wants more pepper in his soup. Don't forget to wash that tray. Half the time, those messages were either not important or not even true. Still, she kept coming. Only Nina remained the same. She still came mostly in the mornings, sometimes in the evenings if the kitchen was quiet. She asked about cooking in a real way. "How do you know when the oil is ready? Why do you fry this first? What makes rice smell better?" Ben answered her when he could. At times they washed plates side by side after the workers had gone. At times they stood near the fire in silence. Once, while peeling yam together, Nina asked, "Did you always cook?" Ben gave a small shrug. "Not always." "What made you learn?"
I learned to cook from need.
Most things in life come from that.
Do you understand that?
"You understand that?" She smiled faintly. "More than people think." That was the kind of thing she said sometimes. Simple words. But they stayed in the mind. Still, nothing romantic lived between them then. That mattered. Nina did not suddenly start dreaming about him. She did not come to the kitchen to stare at him. She was simply the only one in the house who spoke to him like he was still a human being. And because of that, Ben began to relax around her in small ways. Not enough to forget himself, but enough to notice her more. One evening, after everyone had eaten, Ben stepped outside through the back door to get a little air. Tony was already there, squatting near the wall and chewing something. "You look tired," Tony said. Ben leaned against the wall. "I am working." Tony smirked. "It is more than work in this palace." Ben did not answer. Tony lowered his voice. "The princesses are changing." Ben gave him a side look. "You see too much." "I hear too much too." Ben let out a quiet breath. "Those girls are dangerous." Tony grinned. "I know." "They are proud." "I know." "They are difficult." Tony nodded. "I know that too." Ben looked away toward the dark yard. Only Nina is different. Tony sat up a little straighter. Aha. Ben frowned slightly. What? Tony pointed at him.
That is where your answer is, Benjamin. The answer is whole palace. Your older sisters want to press your neck down, but the last one talks to you like a human being.
If anybody can open the house world is one way to put it.
Tony went on, enjoying himself now. The others want to press your neck down, but the last one talks to you like person. If anybody can open this house well, that one. Ben gave a short laugh that held little humor. You speak like an old man. Tony shrugged. Street teaches fast. Then he added, just be careful. What looks soft in this palace can still cut. Ben said nothing after that, but Tony's words stayed with him. Because Tony was noisy, foolish, and young, yet he was often not wrong. As the weeks passed, the sisters stopped moving as one. That was how the real confusion began. Before, they had been united by mockery. They laughed at Ben together, spoke down to him together, treated him as one small thing below them. Now that unity was breaking. Sandra did not like the way Linda entered the kitchen and lingered too long. Linda did not like the way Rita suddenly cared whether Ben had eaten. Rita did not like the way Sandra kept asking for vegetable soup and saying it was just because of the taste. And none of them liked the quiet understanding that Nina seemed to have with him in the kitchen. So each one started hiding her own interest while watching the others. Sandra began keeping her face hard even when she wanted to ask him something kindly. Linda laughed more when she was nervous around him. Rita became ruder whenever she caught herself looking too long. And in the middle of it all, Ben kept watching. Watching how pride turned into curiosity. How curiosity turned into interest. And how interest, when it could not be admitted, started becoming a kind of secret war. The first late-night visit happened by chance, or at least that was how it looked. Ben was in his small room, folding a cloth, when there was a soft knock. He opened the door and found Linda standing there. She had wrapped a light shawl over herself and looked slightly uncomfortable, as if she was not sure why she had come anymore. "My princess?" Linda lifted her chin. "I was passing." Ben waited. Then she said, "I wanted to ask if there is any of that soup left. At this time." She clicked her tongue. "Am I not allowed to be hungry?" Ben hesitated. "There may be small." "Then bring it." He went to the kitchen, brought the soup and handed it to her. Linda took it and stood there another moment. Then she asked, Do you always sleep this early, Benjamin?"
No.
Good night.
Then she left. The next night Rita came. She claimed she heard a noise and wanted to know if he had heard it too. Ben stared at her for a second too long before saying, "No, my princess." Rita folded her arms. "You never hear anything?" "I am sorry." She made an annoyed sound and stayed there awkwardly before walking away. A few nights later, Sandra came. Not for food, not for noise. She stood by his door and said, "If anyone asks, I was not here." Ben's face did not change. "Yes, my princess." She looked almost angry that he answered so calmly. "I came to tell you that if my father praises you too much, do not let it enter your head." "I understand." Sandra stared at him. "Do you?" "Yes, my princess." She remained there a little longer, then left too. These things were small, but they mattered. The palace was no longer resting. Something uneasy had entered it. A strange emotional heat. And the daughters were no longer sure what to do with it. Even the servants had started noticing. Not enough to talk openly, but enough to whisper. Enough to say, "The young man is too handsome for a common coke." Enough to say, "The princess has now passed by the kitchen too often." Enough to say, "This house should be careful." Tony heard all of it. He heard more than most people. He always did. One afternoon he cornered Ben behind the kitchen again. "You see?" Ben kept sorting vegetables. "See what?" "I told you from the start. You are not..."
I warned you from the start. You are not ordinary trouble. You are full trouble. The first princess is watching you, the second is hanging around, the third pretends to hate you, and the last one is the only one with sense.
Face your own life. You are making a mistake.
Face your own life. Tony laughed. My own life is watching other people make mistakes. Ben finally looked at him. And what mistake do you think is coming? Tony's grin faded a little. A big one. That answer stayed in Ben's mind longer than he wanted. The matter of marriage entered the palace slowly too. It began with one of the elders who came to see the king and casually mentioned that Sandra was no longer a child. And one of the queen's relatives asked when Linda would be settled. Then another woman made a thoughtless joke about Rita talking too much for someone still in her father's house. None of it pleased the king. King Daniel loved his daughters, but he also knew how people talked. A royal house without marriages, without sons, without clear future plans, people always found something to say. One evening after dinner, he sat with Queen Beatrice in the smaller sitting room. Our daughters are growing, he said. The queen was quiet for a moment. I know. Sandra should have been married by now. She wanted better than what came. The king rubbed his chin. And now people are talking again. Queen Beatrice looked down. People always talk.
Sometimes people speak the very thing a father is already thinking.
Some days later, the king called Ben to the garden side after lunch. Ben stood respectfully before him. King Daniel looked at him with a strange expression, as though he was trying to say something he himself was not comfortable saying. Ben. Yes, Your Majesty. The king cleared his throat. You have been in this house for some time now. Yes, Your Majesty. You have seen my daughters. Ben said nothing. King Daniel shifted in his seat, especially Sandra. Ben looked up, then lowered his eyes again. The king went on awkwardly. She is my first daughter, proud, yes, but she is still a good girl. Ben remained still. Then the king said the thing that made even him sound uncertain. If a serious man, were to admire her, I would not stand in the way. Ben blinked once. The king's voice grew firmer, as if he now wanted to finish quickly. What I mean is this. If you have any thoughts in that direction, speak like a man. Do not sneak. Ben stared for a short moment. Then he said carefully, Your Majesty, I am only here to work. King Daniel let out a breath. That is not what I asked. Ben lowered his eyes again. Princess Sandra is far above me. The king watched him closely. That is not your decision alone. Ben said nothing more. The king finally waved his hand. Go. Ben bowed and left. But the matter did not stay there. Nothing ever stayed quiet in that palace for long. By evening, Sandra heard about it. She stormed straight to her father's room. You ask the cook what he thinks of me.
Is the story true?
I spoke as a father.
With a cook?
Watch how you talk.
Like a father who wants to know where his daughter stands. With a cook? Her voice cracked on the last word. King Daniel's face hardened. Watch how you talk. Sandra stepped back, wounded pride all over her face. So I have dropped this low in your eyes? That is not what I said. But that is what you did, she shot back. Of all the men in this world, it is the cook you are testing my name with? The king rose slightly. Enough. Sandra's eyes filled with humiliation, but she refused to cry in front of him. Then she turned and walked out. Not because she hated marriage, but because the idea that her father could imagine her with someone he had brought in as a servant felt like an insult too deep to ignore. Linda heard of it before sunset, and her own anger rose for a completely different reason. She found Sandra in their shared sitting room and asked, Did father truly ask him about you? Sandra did not answer. That silence was enough. Linda stared. Why you? Sandra's head snapped up. What kind of question is that? Linda folded her arms. If father must start asking the cook about marriage, why should he ask about you first? Sandra let out a bitter laugh. You too? Linda looked away. I am just saying. Sandra stepped closer. Say it well. Linda's pride rose too fast. I mean, I don't understand why it must be you. Are you the only daughter in this house? Sandra stared at her, now seeing beneath the words. Then slowly she said, So that is your pain. Linda's face changed. I have no pain. Sandra laughed once, without joy. Then why are you shaking? Linda walked out before the fight could grow. But the crack had opened. Not long after, Rita heard the same story and became angry for yet another reason. She cornered Linda in the corridor. So father can ask him about Sandra but not about anyone else? Linda snapped. What are you shouting for? Rita's eyes narrowed. You too, why do you care? Linda folded her arms. Why do you care? Neither answered, because both now understood the truth they did not want to say. The problem was no longer simple hatred. It had become something worse. Pride mixed with curiosity. Curiosity mixed with attraction. Attraction mixed with rivalry. And in the middle of it all stood a man they had once laughed at together. Now they no longer knew what they felt. Did they still hate him? Did they want him? Or did they simply hate the thought that another sister might get him first? That question sat in the palace like fire waiting for dry grass. And Ben, though he kept his face humble and his voice rough, could feel the heat growing. So could Nina. And for the first time, she began to feel uneasy in a way she could not yet explain. Because whatever was starting in that house did not feel small. It felt like the kind of thing that would not end quietly. And it did not. The tension in the palace kept growing, but it no longer came only from the daughters. It began to touch the Queen too. For years, Queen Beatrice had carried one private pain in her heart. She had given the king 4 daughters, good daughters in their own ways, beautiful daughters too. But no son. And in that palace, a son was not just a child. A son was the future. A son was the throne. A son was the answer to the question people never stopped asking behind smiles and greetings. Who would inherit the kingdom? King Daniel never spoke about it too much in public, but she knew him. She knew the silence in him. She knew the weight he carried. Their daughters did not care much for palace matters. Sandra liked power, but not the burden behind it. Linda loved comfort. Rita loved noise more than duty. Nina had sense, but even she had never shown any desire to sit close to the things that ruled the kingdom. And King Daniel would never agree to take another wife just to chase a son. That truth had settled in Queen Beatrice's chest like a stone. Then Ben came. Young, strong, healthy. And before she knew it, one terrible thought began to grow in her mind. At first she pushed it away. Then it came back. Then it stayed. One night, when the king had gone to spend the evening with some elders in another part of the royal grounds, Queen Beatrice could not sleep. She sat alone for a long time in her room, staring at the lamp near the bed. When she finally stood up, she already knew what she was about to do was wrong. But she did it anyway. She wrapped a dark shawl over herself and moved quietly through the passage until she got to the smaller wing where Ben slept. The corridor was silent. She stopped outside his door, looked around once, then knocked softly. Inside, Ben was still awake. He had just finished washing his face and was folding the cloth he used when he heard the knock. He opened the door and froze. "My queen?" Queen Beatrice stepped in before he could say more. Ben quickly shut the door behind her, more from shock than sense. His heart had already begun to pound. "My queen, is everything all right?" She stood in the middle of the room, her face tense, her breathing uneven. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then she looked at him and said quietly, "Ben, I want to ask you for something." Ben stood still. "What is it, my queen?" She moved a little closer, and then he understood. Not fully at first, but enough. His face changed. "My queen? No." The word came out before she even explained herself. Queen Beatrice shut her eyes for 1 second, then opened them again. There was pain in them now, shame too, but she still went on. "You are a man," she said softly. "Young, strong. You understand what a house like this needs. Ben could barely breathe properly. "My queen, please." "My husband needs a son," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "This throne needs an heir. I have watched time pass. I have watched people talk. I have watched my daughters grow without interest in what is coming. Do you know what it means for a woman to sit in a palace and know she has not given the house what it truly needs?" Ben stared at her, stunned. She came closer again, but this time he stepped back. "My queen, please stop." "I am not mad," she whispered quickly. "I know what I am saying. If I bear a son, the kingdom will be safe." Ben shook his head. "No." "Ben." "No," he said again, firmer now. "This is wrong." Queen Beatrice's face trembled. "You think I don't know that?" Ben swallowed. "Please go back to your room." The Queen looked at him like someone who had reached the end of herself. For a second, she looked older than her years. "You will tell the king?" she asked. Ben shook his head at once. "No." "Then forget this happened." Ben said nothing. The Queen turned quickly and moved toward the door. By the time she opened it, shame had already taken over her whole face. She did not look back. Ben stood where he was for a long time after she left. He had come into that palace expecting pride, insult, and secrets. But not this. Not this kind of desperation. He sat on the edge of his bed and passed a hand over his face. The house was worse than he had thought. Far worse. The next morning, Queen Beatrice behaved as if nothing had happened. That made it even heavier. She avoided Ben's eyes, but she still spoke in her normal tone. Ben answered as usual. No one in the house knew that a new secret had entered the palace before daybreak. But that was not the only thing growing in the house. Not anymore. A few days later, King Daniel received a message that changed the pace of everything. A prince from another royal house was coming to visit. His name was Prince Edward Adeyemi. He was the son of a respected ruler, and his family wanted him settled. The visit was not random. It was meant to be serious. He would come, see the daughters, and if all went well, one marriage might rise from the meeting. King Daniel took the matter seriously at once.
This is not a day for foolishness. When Prince Edward comes, you must carry yourselves well, dress impeccably, and speak with sense.
Stiffly. Linda agreed, though her face was distracted. Rita said yes, but her mind was somewhere else. Only Nina truly listened. By then, the older sisters had become too tangled in their feelings around Ben. Sandra still spoke harshly to him in public, but her eyes kept following him when she thought no one noticed. Linda still found reasons to pass near him and correct him. Rita had stopped pretending she hated seeing him. And Ben, for all the carefulness he still wore, was no longer standing as far above the confusion as he had at first. That was the dangerous part. He had entered the palace to watch, to study, to see what kind of people lived inside it. But day by day, he was getting pulled into the very thing he should have stayed outside. He still knew the daughters were proud. He still knew they were dangerous in their own ways. But he was a young man too, and secrets have a way of weakening a person little by little. On the day Prince Edward came, the palace looked bright and ready. Servants moved up and down, chairs were arranged, food was set, the daughters were dressed in fine wrappers and jewelry. But beneath all that beauty, the house was not in order. Sandra was too tense. Linda kept drifting in thought. Rita looked dressed for the room but not present inside it. Twice the Queen had to correct them. Stand straight. Stop looking careless. Smile when spoken to. Even then, they still seemed half absent. Nina saw it all and quietly understood the danger. Her sisters were not focused because their minds were no longer clean. They were too busy thinking of Ben, of each other, and of their own private confusion. When Prince Edward entered with his people, he was received with respect. He was polite, handsome, and carried himself like a man raised close to authority. He greeted the king and queen well. He looked at the daughters, spoke with them one after another, and tried to keep the mood light. But the cracks showed. Sandra answered some questions too sharply. Linda smiled, but her attention wandered. Rita nearly seemed irritated by the whole thing. Only Nina held the family together. She stepped in where needed, answered with calm when silence became awkward, and carried herself with quiet dignity. She did not do it because she was eager to impress the prince. She did it because she could see her father's face tightening from disappointment, and she could not bear to watch him be embarrassed in his own palace. When the prince later joined them for a small dance and social time, Nina came forward only because she had to. Not because she was chasing attention. Not because she had forgotten Ben, but because she still understood what duty meant. That day quietly separated her from her sisters again. She valued Ben, yes, but she had not lost herself in him. After the prince's visit, the tension around Ben became even more dangerous. What had been small before became bolder. Sandra came to his room one night saying she only wanted to clear the air after how rude she had been before. Linda came another night with food, laughing nervously and saying she only wanted to taste his own cooking from his plate. Rita came later, pretending she was angry with him over something small, but she stayed too long, spoke too softly, and stood too close. At first, Ben held himself back. He reminded himself why he was there. He told himself not to lose his head. But the palace was already turning into a trap. One daughter would come to him with pride dressed as boldness. Another would come with softness he had not expected. Another would come with heat and challenge. Each one made him believe, for a moment, that she had dropped her cruelty only for him. Each one made him feel singled out. And because they all came at different times, each one also believed she alone had entered his weakness. That was how it happened. Slowly. Secretly. Badly. Sandra was the first. She came one night burning with anger over the prince's visit and the way her father had handled her. She spoke too much at first, then stopped, then cried out of frustration, then let pride and pain carry her where sense should have stopped her. Linda came after that. She had spent days trying to act playful, but jealousy had already begun eating at her. She wanted to feel chosen, wanted to feel wanted, wanted to prove that she could take what another sister thought was hers. Then Rita. Rita came almost as a challenge, but she too crossed the line. What began like a dare turned into a secret she held close and smiled over in the dark. And Ben, to his own shame, did not stop any of it. By the time he fully saw what was happening, he was no longer outside the trouble. He was inside it, deep inside it, and no one knew. Not the king, not the queen, not Nina. Only Tony suspected there was a storm growing. He had seen too many odd movements at night, too many doors opening when people thought the house was asleep, too many faces changing in the morning. But even he did not yet know how bad it had become. It was Linda who first noticed something was wrong with her body. She felt sick in the morning. Her appetite changed. Then Sandra began feeling weak too, though she hid it behind temper. Rita missed her monthly bleeding and pretended not to count the days. By the time fear truly entered them, it was already late. A doctor was called quietly at first. Then again. Then again. At last, the truth burst into the house like fire. The 3 older daughters were pregnant. All of them. For the same man. The palace shook under the news. Queen Beatrice nearly lost her footing when she heard. King Daniel stared at the doctor so long that the man began to tremble. "What did you say?" The doctor swallowed. "Your Majesty, they are all with child." The king's voice dropped low. "And the father?" No one spoke. But he already knew. Something in him had known before the answer came. His face changed slowly, then all at once. "Bring him!" he roared. The whole palace woke under that shout. Guards ran. Servants froze. Doors opened. Ben was dragged in before the king before he had time to prepare himself. King Daniel hit him before words even came. The first blow threw him sideways. "You animal!" the king thundered. The guards held Ben up. Another blow landed. "You came into my house, ate my food, accepted my trust, and did this." Ben tried to speak, but the king was beyond listening. Queen Beatrice stood a few steps away like someone watching a house fall on top of her. The daughters were in tears now. Sandra stood stiff with humiliation, unable to believe this nightmare had become real. Linda cried openly, holding her wrapper close around herself. Rita shouted between tears that this was not how it was meant to happen. Nina stood at the edge of it all, cold from shock. She looked at Ben, then at her sisters, then at her father. She felt sick. So this was what had been growing in the house. This was the heat she had sensed. This was the thing that had not ended quietly. King Daniel pointed at Ben with shaking fury.
Guards! Lock him up immediately! My lord, I beg you! Take him away!
Daniel, please wait!
Turned to her with a look she had not seen in years. My house has been disgraced. That night, Ben was thrown into a small locked cell behind one side of the palace compound. He had bruises on his face and blood at the corner of his lip. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall and finally let the truth settle on him. He had failed. Not in small ways. In a way that could ruin everything. Inside the main house, no one slept. Sandra cried in anger more than sorrow. Linda cried like her heart had been broken open. Rita blamed Ben, then blamed herself, then blamed her sisters, then blamed the whole palace. Queen Beatrice stayed in silence for long stretches, unable to speak without feeling her own secret burn inside her. King Daniel walked from room to room like a man carrying shame on his head. He was hurt not only as a father, he was hurt as a ruler. How could 3 royal daughters be pregnant for one palace cook? How would he face the elders? How would he face the people? How would he face himself? For the first time in many years, he felt like a weak man inside his own house. By morning, the sisters were forced to look at one another with fresh eyes. Not as rivals, not first, as women who had all fallen. Sandra was the first to speak the hardest truth. "I thought I was in control," she said bitterly, sitting with her sisters. "I thought I was different from both of you." Linda wiped tears from her face. "I thought he chose me." Rita laughed once through her tears. "He made all of us think that." Sandra looked down at her hands. "Pride blinded me." Linda nodded slowly. "Jealousy pushed me." Rita's voice cracked, and foolishness finished the rest. For a long moment nobody spoke. Then Sandra said the thing none of them wanted to hear.
They also destroyed the peace of the house.
Ben deserved. They could no longer pretend they had been forced. The same sisters who once fought each other over him were now sitting in the same shame. And for the first time, they truly understood that they had all fallen into the same pit. Nina remained outside that pit. Not because she was lucky, because she had chosen restraint when her sisters had not. That difference now stood brighter than ever. But even after the truth came out, the rivalry did not fully die. It only changed shape. Now the fear was different. No longer, "How do I get him?" Now it became, "What if he chooses another?" Sandra, as the eldest, felt the strongest right to be chosen. In her mind, if Ben must marry one of them, it should be her by default. Linda could not bear that thought. Rita could not bear it either. And so, new lies entered the house. Linda, driven by fear, secretly sent for Dr. Simon Okiki one afternoon. She met him in a quiet room with the curtains partly drawn and pressed money into his hand. "I need you to tell my parents I am very sick," she said. The doctor looked at her in shock. "Princess, I am already pregnant. Give them one more reason to rush this matter. Tell them I may not have long." Dr. Simon hesitated, but money has ruined better men than him. He took it. On another day, Rita slipped out through the back side of the compound and met Prophetess Grace, a woman known more for noise than truth. Rita, too, carried money. When the woman came to the palace later, she entered dramatically, prayed loudly, and declared that death was hanging over the house. King Daniel and Queen Beatrice listened in pain and confusion as the woman announced that one daughter's life was under threat and that the only way to break the shadow was for her to be joined quickly to the father of her unborn child. The palace shook again. Queen Beatrice burst into tears. King Daniel looked like a man about to break apart. But not everyone in the palace was blind. Tony had begun watching more carefully than ever. He saw Linda speak privately with the doctor. He saw the envelope pass. He followed Rita at a distance and saw her meet the prophetess near the outer gate. He even noticed something else. When everyone else came near Ben out of fear, ownership, or desperation, Nina came near him only out of human concern. Once, Tony saw her leave food near the cell and walk away without trying to beg Ben for promises. That stayed with him. The loud, troublesome boy nobody took seriously had become the palace's quiet witness. He kept a small phone one of the guards had once given him. With it, he began taking pictures when he could. A hand passing money. A doctor stepping out of a hidden meeting. A prophetess smiling too early before entering the palace. And Nina standing quietly outside the cell with a covered plate, not speaking, not performing, just showing simple care. Tony gathered it all. Because sometimes the person no one values is the one who sees most clearly. The day Tony finally went to the king, no one expected it. King Daniel was sitting alone, tired in a way that made him look older. Tony entered hesitantly. The king frowned at once. What now? Tony swallowed. Your Majesty, I know something. The king almost chased him out. But something in the boy's face made him pause. What? Tony stepped closer and held out the phone with shaking hands. I saw things. King Daniel took it. He looked. And one after another, the pictures told their own ugly story. Linda with the doctor. Rita with the prophetess. Money changing hands. Meetings that should not have happened. Then one last picture. Nina standing by the locked cell with a plate of food, her face serious and calm. Not begging. Not pretending. Just caring. The king stared at that last one longer than the others. Then he lowered the phone slowly. Queen Beatrice, who had come in halfway through, saw his face and asked, "What is it?" The king handed her the phone. By the time she finished looking, her face had gone cold. Tony stood there nervously. I only saw. That is all. King Daniel looked at him for a long time. This was the same boy they called noisy, rude, and useless. Yet now he had brought more truth into the room than the adults around him. The king spoke quietly. Sometimes the people nobody takes seriously notice the things others miss. Tony blinked. He had not expected gentleness. Queen Beatrice sat down slowly. This house is eating itself. No one argued with that. After long hours of thought, King Daniel made his decision. He could not throw away tradition. He could not cast the unborn children aside as if they were nothing. Whatever anger he carried, the children had done no wrong. So he ordered Ben brought out of the cell and stood before him once more. Ben looked bruised, tired, and ashamed. King Daniel's voice was hard. You will take responsibility. Ben did not speak. The king went on. You cannot marry all three, but you will marry one. The room held its breath. The others, the king said. Their children will still be raised in this house as my blood. No child of my daughters will be treated like dirt. Sandra looked up sharply. Linda clutched her wrapper tighter. Rita shook her head. Then all three began speaking at once. No. He cannot just be given. He should choose. King Daniel thundered, Silence! They all went still. Sandra spoke first when she could. If he must marry one of us, then let him choose himself. Linda nodded quickly. Yes, Rita added. Do not hand him over to the eldest like property. The king's jaw tightened. Even now, in the middle of shame, they still wanted to be chosen. Still wanted not to be the rejected one. That truth hurt him deeply. But he could also see that forcing one name on Ben would only light another fire, so at last he said, Fine. Everyone looked at him. King Daniel turned to Ben.
You have a short time to think well and choose one.
Ben swallowed. Your Majesty. You are already alive because I have allowed it, the king cut in. Do not test my patience. Cooperate or this freedom will disappear. He ordered the guards to release Ben from the cell, but not from watch. Ben was taken back to his room under warning. The palace quieted after that, but it was not peace. It was waiting. Waiting for one answer, one name, one choice that could calm the house or destroy what little remained of it. And as night fell over the palace, everyone understood the same thing. The worst had not yet passed. It was only changing shape. The next evening, King Daniel called the whole family into the main sitting hall. No one came with peace in their heart. Sandra entered first, looking pale and hard at the same time. Linda came after her, her eyes swollen from too much crying. Rita looked restless, angry, and tired. Nina walked in last among the sisters, quiet as always, but more guarded now. Queen Beatrice sat beside the king, her face calm on the outside, but her hands were not steady. Ben was brought in by 2 guards. He was no longer inside the cage, but the beating had left its mark. One side of his face still looked bruised. His lip had healed badly. He walked with shame on his shoulders. Tony stood near the back wall, trying not to draw attention to himself, but watching everything like always. King Daniel looked around the room. "This matter ends today," he said. Nobody answered. The king turned to Ben. "You were given time. Now speak. Choose one of my daughters." The room grew still. Sandra lifted her head. Linda held her breath. Rita folded her fingers tightly inside her wrapper. Nina's eyes stayed on Ben, but not with hope. Only with tension. Ben looked at the 3 pregnant daughters first. Then he looked at the floor. Then he lifted his head slowly and said, "Your Majesty, I cannot choose any of them." The room went cold. King Daniel's face darkened at once. "What did you say?" Ben swallowed. "I do not want Princess Sandra. I do not want Princess Linda. I do not want Princess Rita." The sisters stared at him as if he had slapped all of them at once. Then Ben said the one thing that shook the house even more.
The only woman I truly want is Princess Nina.
Back. Rita let out a sharp sound that was almost a laugh and almost a cry. Queen Beatrice's eyes widened. Even Tony's eyes nearly left his face. And Nina looked like the ground had shifted under her feet. King Daniel rose to his feet with a force that shook the chair behind him. "You dare," he thundered. "You dare stand in front of me after all this shame and say the only daughter you want is the one you did not even touch?" Ben did not move. The king's voice grew louder. "Why Nina? Why not the daughters you already ruined? Why the only one who still has some dignity left in this house?" Ben took a slow breath. Because he knew there was no going back now. Because the truth he had hidden had finally reached the point where silence would only make things worse. He bowed his head once, and then said quietly, "Because I am not who you think I am." That stopped even the king for a second. Ben lifted his face. "My name is not just Benjamin Okoro, your cook. I am Prince Benjamin Okoro." The room fell into another terrible silence. Ben went on before anyone could stop him. "I am from a wealthy royal family. I did not come into this palace by chance. I came in disguise." King Daniel stared at him. Queen Beatrice's lips parted, but no words came out. Ben's voice stayed low and steady now, even though the shame in it could still be heard. "The rough speech, the simple clothes, the hearing problem, all of it was part of the role. I wanted to see your daughters as they truly are when there was no crown before them, no title, no wealth, no advantage. I wanted to know who would respect a man when he looked small." Sandra stepped forward first. "You used us?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ben did not hide from it. "Yes." Linda began to cry again, but this time the tears were different. Not only shame, not only pain, humiliation too. Rita's face twisted with anger. "So all this time we were a test to you?" Ben answered her with the truth. "At first, yes." King Daniel looked like he could barely stand. "You entered my house under false pretense." "Yes, Your Majesty." "You deceived me." "Yes." "You deceived all of us." Ben lowered his head. "Yes." Then he forced himself to finish the truth. "What I found in this house was pride, cruelty, Class arrogance, lust, manipulation, jealousy, entitlement. He paused, then looked toward Nina. But in Princess Nina, I found something else: patience, kindness, responsibility, self-control, self-respect. Nina's face did not soften. If anything, it became more careful, because the truth was out now. And instead of making things easier, it made them harder. Much harder. The older sisters did not take the truth like people who had simply been corrected. They took it like people who had been stripped. Sandra laughed once, bitter and wounded. So that is what we were? A lesson? Linda wiped tears from her face, but they kept coming. I thought at least something between us was real. Rita looked at him with hot shame in her eyes. You made us feel chosen one by one. Ben closed his eyes briefly, because they were right. The king looked at him with disgust. You came here to judge my daughters, but look at what you became. Ben did not defend himself, because he had no clean defense. I crossed the line, he said quietly. I came to test, but I fell into the same mess. I let things go too far. I accept that. Queen Beatrice finally spoke, her voice weak. Too far? Ben turned to her and answered with the same painful honesty. Yes, my queen. Those words struck her harder than the others knew, because she too remembered the line she herself had crossed in secret. And now, while the whole palace stood exposed in one way, she stood exposed inside her own heart. Not publicly, but enough. She lowered her eyes. King Daniel paced once, then turned sharply. So you are a prince. Fine. Does that remove the pregnancies? Does that remove the shame? Does that remove the damage? No, Ben said at once. It does not. That answer mattered, because it showed he knew the truth could not save him from consequence. Then all eyes moved to Nina, because after the shouting, after the reveal, after the shame, she had become the center without asking for it. The man she had respected was not a cook. He was a prince. He had chosen her above her sisters, but he was also the father of their unborn children, and his mission had brought ruin into the house. Nina stood still for a long moment. She looked at Ben carefully, as though she was seeing all his faces at once. The quiet man in the kitchen, the rough palace cook, the prince who had hidden himself, the man who had failed his own test. Finally she spoke. So every morning in the kitchen, she said softly, you were acting. Ben shook his head at once. Not everything. But enough, she replied. He had no answer. Nina's voice did not rise. That made it hit even harder. You came here to weigh people, to measure them, to see who was worthy of your love. But while doing that, you forgot that people are not goats in a market. Nobody moved. Nina went on, still calm, still clear. I respected you when I thought you were small, not because I wanted anything from you, not because I was weak. I did it because it was the right thing to do. She paused. And now I know that while I was treating you as a person, you were hiding the truth and sleeping with my sisters. Ben's face tightened. I am sorry, he said. I know you are, Nina replied, but sorry does not always repair what is broken. That cut the room deeper than shouting would have. Ben looked at her with something he had not shown openly before. Real pain.
Nina.
No, let me finish.
She drew a breath. You choosing me now does not clean this matter. It does not remove what happened. It does not remove the fact that my sisters will carry your children. It does not remove the fact that you tested us all and still got trapped in your own test. Her eyes held his. And I cannot marry a man who has been with my sisters. The room shook under that sentence too. But Nina did not take it back. She continued with dignity that made even the king keep silent. We can be friends. We can keep the truth of the good moments we shared. But as husband and wife? No. Your deceit has gone too far. This is the consequence. Ben stood there and took it, because he knew she was right. And because for the first time in all this, he was losing the one thing that had been clean. Not his title, not his pride. The one honest connection he had found. That refusal changed the room again. Now the matter was no longer about who Ben wanted. It was about what truth had cost everybody. Sandra sat down heavily. For the first time, some of her fight left her. Linda cried quietly, but she stopped looking at Nina with jealousy. Rita's anger faded into something else, something closer to tired understanding. They had all wanted to be chosen. But now they could see that this whole thing had been rotten from the beginning. Not only because of Ben, because of them too. Sandra spoke first. I mocked him because I thought he was beneath me. Linda stared at her lap. I wanted what I thought another person was getting. Rita let out a long breath. I acted like wanting was the same as having the right. The sisters looked at each other. No more fighting. No more trying to win. Only truth now. For the first time, Sandra said what pride had hidden for too long. We helped destroy this house too. Linda nodded slowly. Yes. Rita's eyes filled again. And now we must carry it. That was the beginning of their real change. Not complete change. Not easy change. But real. King Daniel sat down again slowly, like a man whose anger had reached the point of exhaustion. He looked older now. Not because of the years, because truth had removed all false comfort from his house in one sweep. He looked at the doctor, who had been called back after the evidence Tony brought. Then at Prophetess Grace, who had been dragged in that morning after more questions were asked. Both stood before him with fear all over their faces. You took money to lie in my house, the king said to the doctor. Dr. Simon fell to his knees. Forgive me, your majesty. King Daniel turned to the prophetess. And you came to use God's name to push a lie. The woman started crying. I was misled. Enough, the king said. His voice was tired, not loud. That made it heavier. You will both leave this palace in disgrace. If I see either of you near this house again, I will show you mercy has limits. They were dragged out in shame. No one defended them. Then the king's eyes fell on Tony. The little boy shifted awkwardly. King Daniel held out a hand. Come here. Tony moved forward slowly. The king looked at him for a long time before speaking. They called you noisy. Tony blinked. They called you disrespectful. Tony lowered his head. They called you useless. Tony said nothing. King Daniel nodded once. Yet you were the one who saw what adults were too proud to notice. Tony looked up in surprise. The king continued. Sometimes the person no one values sees the truth most clearly. Queen Beatrice's face softened at those words. And for the first time in that house, Tony looked seen. Not tolerated. Seen. The queen spoke next. This boy will go to school.
Tony will go to school. Not someday, but soon.
Tony's eyes filled, but he quickly looked away, pretending to scratch his face. Nobody laughed at him, because the moment was too real. Then Ben spoke again. He did not speak as a prince first. He spoke as a man who had failed. I will not run from responsibility, he said. Everyone looked at him. He took a breath and went on. These children are mine, all of them, and none of them will be abandoned. Sandra's face changed. Linda looked up. Rita stared. Ben continued. Whatever happens between me and this house from today, let it be clear. I will provide for them. I will stand by what I have done. I will not leave the mothers of my children carrying this shame alone. That mattered. Because it separated him from being only a seducer. It showed he was not trying to escape through title. King Daniel watched him carefully. Then the king said, more to himself than to anyone else, so this was the real test. Nobody spoke. He looked around the room, at his daughters, at the queen, at Ben, at Nina, at Tony, and then he said the truth that had taken him too long to reach. It was never class. It was character. The room held those words quietly, because they were true. Titles had hidden too much. Poverty had been used as an insult. Royal blood had been worn like a shield. But in the end, what exposed everybody was not status. It was conduct. How they treated someone they believed had nothing. How they behaved when nobody important seemed to be watching. The days that followed did not turn into a happy song. That would have been a lie. Too much had happened for that. But things began to settle in a more honest way. Prince Benjamin Okoro's identity was confirmed through messages, elders, and the arrival of men from his family. Chief Felix returned and openly admitted he had helped arrange the disguise. His face carried shame too now because he had not expected things to go as far as they did. Sandra, Linda, and Rita remained in the palace, pregnant, humbled, wiser, and permanently changed. They stopped fighting over Ben because there was nothing left to win. What remained was consequence, and they had to carry it together. Sandra became quieter. Linda cried less and thought more. Rita lost some of the pride that had once made her so reckless. They were still themselves, but not the same selves. Queen Beatrice moved through the house with more silence than before. Nobody knew the secret she carried about that night in Ben's room, but she knew it, and it humbled her deeply. She stopped thinking of herself only as the wounded wife and mother in this story. She knew she too had nearly become something she would have hated in another woman. King Daniel changed too. He did not become soft overnight, but his pride took a wound that taught him something. He began listening more, watching more, judging less by appearance. And Nina remained steady. She did not become cruel because of what Ben had done. She did not suddenly hate him, but she kept her distance. Not in bitterness, in wisdom. Sometimes they still spoke. Short conversations. Plain ones. The kind built on the friendship that had once lived honestly between them in the kitchen. One evening, Ben found her there again, standing by the same table where they had once washed vegetables together. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "I lost something I will not get back." Nina did not pretend not to understand. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "I meant what I said about you." "I know. And I will always mean it." Nina's face softened a little, but not enough to reopen what she had closed. "Then let it remain something true," she said, "not something you force into another form." He gave a small nod. It hurt, but he accepted it. Because some losses are the honest price of deception, and some love arrives only to show a person what he was not worthy to keep. Months later, the palace looked calmer from the outside. But calm is not the same as untouched. The house had been saved from one kind of collapse, but not without scars. Tony was sent to school just as the Queen promised. On the morning he left, he wore clothes that looked too new on him and carried a small bag like it might disappear if he put it down. Before getting into the car, he looked back at the palace for a long moment. Nina smiled at him. "Go and use your sharp eyes on books now." Tony grinned. "I will still come back and know everybody's secret." Even King Daniel laughed a little at that. It was the kind of laughter that comes after too much pain. Small, but real. Ben took responsibility for the pregnancies exactly as he had promised. Nothing was hidden anymore. Nothing was denied. And though Nina did not become his wife, she remained the woman he openly respected most in that house. In the end, that became part of the lesson too. A person can be chosen and still walk away. A person can be loved and still say no. And that no can be the cleanest truth in the whole story. As for the palace, gossip did what gossip always does. It grew legs, then wings. Soon people were whispering not only about the daughters and the prince disguised as a cook. Some even started lowering their voices and asking whether the scandal had touched the Queen too. Nobody proved anything. Nobody confirmed anything. But once shame enters a royal house, it spreads faster than Harmattan fire in dry grass. And that became the final joke people told in secret. That one handsome cook entered the palace and nearly made the whole building pregnant. Moral. In the end, the princesses learned a truth it should have known from the start. A title does not reveal character. Wealth does not create dignity. And the way you treat people you think are beneath you will one day speak louder than your name. The proud daughters looked down on a man they believed was ordinary, and their pride led them into shame. The prince came to test others, but his own lack of discipline exposed him too. The queen learned that fear can push even respectable people toward dark thoughts. The king learned that people often miss the truth because they are too busy measuring status. And the little orphan boy nobody respected saw more clearly than all of them. So the lesson remained in that palace long after the tears had dried. Respect is not for the rich alone. Self-control is worth more than desire. And when pride leads the heart, disgrace is never far behind.